of the preacher and the quote unquote prodigy podcast. And if you're new to our podcast, you may be wondering what is going on. That Jericho is wearing a trash can on his head. Explain yourself, son. Why are you wearing a trash receptacle upon your noggin?
In defense of needing to catch up to you in picking games, this past quarterfinal week, I believe it was.
You can't see the smile on my face, but I'm
I
smiling.
went 0-5. 0 wins. And you're finally relishing the fact that you beat me after all these years in picking games.
Well, I've learned from the Buckeyes that what happened before no longer matters. It's only about the present. So
Correct.
You can take the trash can off after going over the course of the last week, excepting last night, and we'll go there in which you correctly picked the Irish.
Off camera.
0-5. So I can vouch for that we had a busy week. We did not do the podcast last night. I picked Penn State to win.
They looked like the better team. Notre Dame had the bigger plays.
I had Penn State winning 20-17, and you didn't give me a number. But
I had 19-13 Irish.
So both teams scored a little bit more than we thought. That will not help you to catch up. The season is securely mine. You've been mathematically eliminated.
Yes.
But we have 2 more college football games to talk about.
I'm dead even at 41-41, and you are 46-36.
So doing all right.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about what happened in the quarterfinal round. Both of the smaller division teams, and in fact, all 4 of the teams who had byes, lost in the quarterfinal round.
Further credits the fact that you want no more byes. You want 16-team playoff, which I think after this first year probably would not be the worst idea we've had. Might be the best.
So what I ultimately want is what we talked about in our first or second podcast last season when we were sitting on the deck at the condo we were renting, in which we did a full-scale conference realignment, and we imagined conferences that were 6 teams times 2 divisions times 8 conferences. So we had 96 teams in there, completely realigned. That creates a natural playoff of 16 teams and would lead to a true champion. But since that's never going to happen, the alignment that we had, some of it was around college basketball rivalries and just other goofy things. It was a lot of fun. You can go back and revisit that podcast if you want. I really think that you simply create conference champion auto bids for the 5 that we have, and potentially Sun Belt, potentially MAC, potentially CUSA or American, something like that. And then you have the champs, you have the at-larges, and then you simply seed from that point. You have a committee, and yes, there's going to be a first round, Texas versus Toledo game. That's fine. What we've seen is teams who do not play get rusty, and the benefit for getting healthy is counteracted, ultimately overwhelmed by the rust factor.
Yeah. It definitely seemed that way. Oregon came out the gate slow against Ohio State. Arizona State.
When you say slow, it was 34-0.
Right. It was rough. Arizona State came out rough against Texas. Now these teams did manage to be like, okay, we're actually playing live football now and make it close. But at that point, the bye week had just over-rested them, and they were not really ready for live action against another opponent and against other coaches. And that backfired. And so I do like your idea of going to 16 teams, first round being all home games. That creates a lot of fun. We saw that in the first round this year. That was some very exciting games to watch.
Ask people in Athens and Eugene right now, business owners, the restaurants, the hotels, if they would like to have a home game.
Yeah.
Of course they would.
And it's more money because it's more games, so I think everybody wins in this situation. Although the season might go a little bit longer to fit all the games, but
I don't really think it needs to go any longer. You just have the first week.
I don't think it should.
No,
but I think it could because we added a week this year, but it's not the end of the world.
I just think you have, instead of having 4 first weekend games, you have 8. It's just like the college basketball. So I really think that March Madness, as I've said in the podcast before, is the ultimate sports spectacle in the United States. And it's done so well. There's lots of on the bubble watching down the stretch. There's a lot of controversy, which is what sports is supposed to be: entertainment, conversation. And you get a legit playoff all the way through. You have someone who does the seeding, you have a committee. Fine, that happens. They can use the computers. But having a week off and then seeing Boise State in the national quarterfinal only to really be outclassed by Penn State, no one wants to see that.
No. Yep.
Should we talk about a team that really, really wanted to be in the playoff and felt that they deserved it? The team from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Tell me about the Crimson Tide.
Well, that was a wild one. We're talking about the game against Michigan, correct? Or anything post that with Milroe, anything. It seemed
we're talking
like
about
the
Reliaquest.
Old Outback Bowl, or the new Outback Bowl. It seemed like it really was just chaos for the monsoon part of the game, which was about the first eighth of gameplay. And then after that, things settled down, and Alabama did look like the better team after that, which they probably were going into it. Michigan really capitalized in the first quarter, scoring 16 points, all but 3 of those on turnovers.
But aided by turnovers.
Right.
It wasn't a pick six or anything.
But fumbles,
short
because
fields.
The ball was slippery. Interception by Wesley Walker, which is an excellent read, by the way. Weren't able to punch in scores, but we have Dominic Zavada.
The best player in college football.
Just as good as 3 James Franklin would disagree, but just as good at 3 points. And nice to see Freddie Moore catch a back shoulder. And then from then on, Michigan just had to play the football they played against Ohio State, which is burn the clock and don't let anything get over your head.
But the difference is they played the same style of football, but they played it without Josiah Stewart, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Makari Page, and on and on and on. Donovan Edwards,
and Davis Warren eventually in the game.
They played the same style with the same players that, they're going to have in spring practice minus Bryce Underwood. And they did all right.
So our practice squad beat Alabama's pretty much A-team because all of them opted in except
Williams was
Justice
out
Haynes.
there. Milroe was out there. Yeah, that Tim Smith, the defensive lineman, he was a monster in the game. But, yeah, Michigan used the exact same game plan as they used against Ohio State. The umbrella coverage defensively, and just get home with 4 if you can. Occasionally send Barham. But then on offense, just shorten the game by getting to 3rd and 4 or 3rd and 5, and half the time make the play, and the rest of the time punt it and make them run the length of the field.
And when Michigan didn't do that, like we saw at the end of the first half, it went against them, trying to steal 3 points, which I kind of understand because you have the best kicker in the country.
You tell him the preacher was mad.
Yeah, it was like, 30 seconds, and it was a 3rd and 1, and then Milroe rips off a play, and then it's a big passing play, and they march all the way downfield and get some points. But overall, a fun game to watch.
And it could be the birth of a star, number 23. You saw, we had talked about this going in, that the spotlight was going to go to Jordan Marshall as the feature back in the feature position on Michigan's team. And he didn't tear people up, but he ground out 4 yards a carry, or a little bit more than that, against Alabama, hit 100 yards. And I thought the best thing to see was the one play where he ran to the left sideline, slid out of bounds. He came back, his entire arm was caked in green. It was like he had transformed into Hulk, and I think it was right after that he had the long run, the 23-yarder it might have been.
Yeah.
And he ripped it off, and it was like this guy just had his origin story moment, sliding across the field in Tampa, Florida.
Yeah, I actually saw a statistic that said that Donovan Edwards and Kalel Mullings combined through the months of October and November had 18 broken tackles. Jordan Marshall just in that game had 12 on 23 rushing attempts. So
Which tells you the blocking wasn't great. I mean, Andrew Sprague did okay, but the loss of Andrew Gentry and the opting out of a big Hinton was a factor as well. So we saw a little bit of Michigan's offense and defense for next year and kicking game, which looks all right. Hollenbeck with the left-footed punts did okay.
He actually did.
It sounds like they're maybe talking to Duke's punter right now. I'm not really sure. So we shall see. But good momentum for Michigan. They haven't had the best portal season on the acquisition side, but they did pretty good on retention side. You would have loved to keep Gentry. You would have loved to keep Tyler Morris for sure. Beyond that, everything else, as far as attrition out, makes some sense. Not really a lot of starting caliber players left the team.
Yep, and we're gonna have to see how Chip Lindsey does, because not exactly the best hire we could have gotten if we really pushed for it, but a hire that we're gonna have to be okay with, because he's gonna have to make it work with Bryce and then Mikey Keene as well, and try and figure that out.
I really think the guy that made the most sense for Michigan would have been Marcus Arroyo, but they weren't going to wait on Arizona State for him to come available. They needed to get someone in there to sell the offense to transfer portal wide receiver candidates. And though that didn't go well, getting the best back in the portal is what Michigan needed. It doesn't look like they have a good number two after Marshall. Ben Hall doesn't look great. Cole Cabana is gone, first to Minnesota and now I think to Western Michigan. So Micah Capana, potentially down the line, but right now it'll be the Justin Haynes, Jordan Marshall show. Jordan and Justice.
Fine with that.
Other games in the quarterfinal or the bowl season.
Shall we talk
before
about
we pick the two games that are left?
Should we talk about? Did we see anything from the FCS championship game?
No, I didn't watch it.
Okay. And I believe that brings us to the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic between the.
Well, do we want to talk about anything else in the playoff? Do we want to talk about Oregon getting beasted by
I
Ohio
don't
State?
really want to talk about that.
Do we want to talk about Georgia? Nothing like that.
I mean, we could talk about
Carson Beck is getting $4 million.
to come to Miami now. I don't know what else you want to talk about from the Notre Dame Penn State game, since we didn't really get to do a preview on that.
That went again according to the script. For most people, it was close, fairly low scoring. I was more of a believer in Penn State, again by just a hair, because I thought that they had more offensive diversity. Riley Leonard has not proven himself to be a great downfield passer. He's a great runner for sure, but my thought was Penn State has more weaponry. Penn State did not complete a single pass to a wide receiver in the entire game.
Drew Aller completed more passes to the other team than he did
to his
own
own wide receiver core. We had been saying for 2 years on this podcast, we think that this was going to be a good year for Penn State. It was.
Probably the best James Franklin's going to get in a while.
And yet, he did not beat Ohio State. He didn't have a chance to beat Michigan. He didn't win the Big Ten. He got, he's probably going to end up the season ranked number 4, which is good for James Franklin and Penn State. But they did not climb this summit.
No, it did seem, well, like you said, they had more diversity on offense, especially with the play calling. To me, thinking Notre Dame has a better defense. Even without Riley Mills, who is arguably their best defender, they still had All-Americans Xavier Watts and Howard Cross, and Christian Gray made a great interception down the stretch. It seemed to me like the way Notre Dame locked down Georgia and locked down Indiana beforehand, that Notre Dame's defense was the real deal. And although it didn't seem like that at times, Penn State was able to move up and down the field fairly well. Notre Dame, like I said, and like they have been able to all playoffs, made the big plays. You saw the touchdown pass to was it
Jordan Greathouse.
Right, yeah, when the
and
guy fell down.
Aeneas Williams, our big play to Aeneas Williams.
Just deep balls passing the field, nothing really kind of methodically down the field. And then Jeremiah Love had a all-effort touchdown run. Just a great game, a fairly evenly matched game, but Notre Dame comes out on top. Unfortunate for James Franklin, because that's probably the best chance he's ever going to get as Penn State head
And
coach.
Abdul Carter wasted about 5 minutes before declaring to the draft. So we'll see what they do in the portal. They should be okay with Aller back. I doubt they'll get both of the tailbacks to return. There's a certain shelf life for running backs. I just wanted to end by thinking about, the discussion I heard Paul Feinbaum having. He was ripping James Franklin for being aggressive at the end. And when Penn State got the ball with less than a minute to go, you and I both said, how aggressive will they be? And we said, well, here's what they're going to do. They're going to run one play to Singleton and see what happens. And that's exactly what they did.
10-yard game.
And then we said they're going to take a shot to
Tyler Warren, and they didn't. They tried to hit him on an out route,
and then the pass, and it was just a bad ball. Yeah. But I wouldn't be beating up James Franklin or Andy Kotelnicki, and certainly not Drew Aller. Why not? Try to win the game. If you don't, people are going to beat you up and say, well, you had 2 timeouts, and you could have got in field goal range to win it, and you didn't, and you just run up the clock, you'll take it on the chin that way. Too.
Yeah, in the past, Penn State has played conservative and has not worked out in their favor. So I tried to change things up. It didn't work this time either. So that's
all right, so from Penn State and Notre Dame to
the other semi.
Texas effectively hosting Ohio State in Jerry World. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's going to be 80-20 fans. I think it'll be fairly close in terms of attendance. But you do think that there would be an advantage for Texas in terms of travel fatigue. Mm-hmm. But Vegas does not think that there will be an advantage at the end of the game. We have a line of
Buckeyes -6. Over-under is 53.5. So fairly average over-under. Not as low as the Penn State Notre Dame game was.
So 30-24.
Yeah. That's a good score. You'll love to see or hear about that score anytime.
I heard that once before. Let's go, Zach. Let's go, Zach.
What are you thinking?
I think Ohio State will cover. I don't want them to.
No.
But I think that Ohio State is firing on all cylinders on defense. And they're firing on a couple cylinders on offense. You're not seeing a lot of Emeka Egbuka right now or G. Scott, but Jeremiah Smith is just, he really is the best.
All jokes aside,
best player in college football. And he's really a lot like Calvin Johnson. He just is a physical, not as tall, but he's a better physical athlete than anybody he faces, and he has such good skills. He's a technician. So
great hands.
I think that the defense of Ohio State is playing so well right now, and I was just not encouraged by what I saw Texas down the stretch against the Sun Devils. They really needed some help to come out of there alive. So I'm going to take Ohio State to win the game. I'm going to say 33-17. I don't think it'll be close.
It's going to say $34-20. There's a little bit of hope with chances that Silas Bolden and Marquise Golden can get open against man coverage against Ohio State, since these are probably the most physically, I don't know. It's fairly even between them and Oregon with the receivers that this Ohio State secondary has faced. But they weren't threatened by Trayshawn Holden, although we did have a good game. They weren't threatened by Tez Johnson. I don't think that's going to happen again.
Well, part of that was Jordan James was out, and they couldn't really press the run very much. So they and seeing more safety help.
Yeah, Travion Wisener might have to. He's going to have a solid game in order for that passing game to open. But the difference here is misdirection works best against man coverage, and Sark is the best in the country at confusing the defense. So Ohio State's defensive secondary and linebackers are going to have to stay very disciplined in tracing their guys on mesh concepts and stuff like that, motions, but seeing what Georgia's man coverage did to Texas in the SEC championship game and how Texas barely came out alive against Arizona State. Give me the Bucs to continue rolling and to make the championship game and to create a championship game in which we hope a meteor strike will hit Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
So that said, I'm going to ask you a question about the playoff. I'm going to set an over-under at 0.5. How many of the coaches of the Final Four teams will not be at the same institution next year? So you have Freeman, Franklin, Day, Sark.
I think the best chance to leave is Freeman, because I think Freeman has the most NFL interest, especially from the Bears. I think that James Franklin could leave. I don't think he will, though, after a semifinal finish, something that Penn State has not had in a very long time.
I think Franklin's the one most likely to stay.
Yeah,
Of the four.
well, I think Day is most likely to stay.
I
I think Ryan Day is most likely to stay. I think even if you don't win the championship, and even if I'm saying he's most likely to stay because I'm assuming they're going to beat Texas, and if they beat Texas, then he's going to stay. If they don't beat Texas, there's going to be a little bit of uncertainty. I think Sark stays almost for sure. I think he's got the best chance. I think Ryan Day is nearly a lock if they win the Cotton Bowl. But I think he's coming back for another year. It could be just where the Ohio State AD Ross Bjork looks at the Michigan Jim Harbaugh situation and was like, well, you give him 4 or 5 years to figure it out, and then he'll come through, and then he'll put together his stretch.
So let me clarify. I don't think Ryan Day is getting fired. I think Ryan Day sees this year as his Jim Harbaugh year. Peak roster, lots of upperclassmen coming back, and what we heard him say between the second to last game and the Michigan game was his family is just tired of the pressure to beat Michigan, and I think he wins it all. He goes pro. And I think maybe if he doesn't even win it all, he goes pro. There are teams that would be interested in him for sure as an OC and potentially as a head coach. And I think he's done. I'm not because he has to, but because he chooses to, the same way Harbaugh did. So I think that Sarkisian is getting interest. I think he stays. He's got too much to look forward to with future rosters. I think that James Franklin doesn't have anywhere to go. His agent has milked the cow long enough that other teams are expressing interest in trying to get a pay raise for his client. I think Freeman is a really interesting NFL candidate if he wins it all. I think Day really gives it a strong consideration to go. Not because he has to, but because his wife tells him.
I think Day will leave once he gets a win against Ohio State, against Michigan, and then leaves Ohio
State. So he'll be there forever.
I do think he will try and stay there because he knows he can now. He knows that he knows that there have been chances to beat Michigan. It's not been like blowouts year in and year out. And I think he is just waiting for a better chance and a more opportune shot to put the dagger in the Wolverines. But they have not yet.
Well, that brings us to the end of our second to last podcast of the season. We'll look ahead to the national championship game on the 20th next time, and hopefully you won't be wearing a trash can. I mean, if I go 0 for this week, 0 for 2, do I have to wear a trash can if I get? It's got to be 0 for 5.
Yeah, 0 for 5 or 0 for 4 maybe, depending on the week. But
all right. Till then, I'm the preacher.
I'm the prodigy.
Peace.
Deuces.